Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to the ways that Pakistan is going to be moving forward with regards to changes in the US administration, and of course, particularly the impact that this has had on the USAID projects in Pakistan and the kind of help and support that we were looking at in terms of the aid coming in from the US. This, of course, has affected 39 projects in the country, and there's, of course, a lot more in terms of the work that has been done, the money that has been put in, and of course the number of beneficiaries and effectees of these interventions. At the same time, of course, it is a place for evaluation in terms of the impact that aid creates and how sustainable it is, what kind of dependency it involves, and what is going to be the move ahead for Pakistan in particular after this particular funding has been axed, but also in terms of the ways and the options in which Pakistan can actually develop its own economy and thrive to create a more sustainable future for itself. That's going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to be taking a look at the economical condition of the country with reference to, of course, the ways in which we have seen the CPI inflation going down, and this is, of course, a downward trend that we've been seeing for a while. And on Monday, today, it, of course, hit the lowest in 9 years, and 1.51% is the rate at which we're seeing this particular aspect. And this, of course, is a very, very integral way forward in terms of where the economy is heading and whether or not we're going to be moving in the right direction in terms of the ways that these variables and indicators actually impact. So we're going to be taking a look at what that means and what the trend actually points towards, and whether or not we're going to move towards a scenario where we can then talk about inflation rate itself. That is going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And we've been joined online for our first segment by former Ambassador Mr. G.R. Baluch. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And I'll start with you in terms of your opinion in the way that we have seen the U.S. administration and the ending of the USAID projects in particular, and the kind of funding support for countries such as Pakistan coming in from the U.S. That has been put forward with immediate effect, of course, directly and immediately impacting a lot of the projects that have been going on in economies like Pakistan, and of course the kind of humanitarian support that it provided to its people. And so I want your take in terms of this particular decision taken by the US administration in terms of whether or not this is something that we can question a country on in terms of the kind of projects it has put forward and in the ways that this has been axed, and how exactly then can we take a look of that in terms of the general scenario in the international community of what a sovereign state can and cannot do.
Thank you, Sana. Yeah, I think it's one of those decisions that were taken in his first 48 hours or 36 hours of taking over as the president. And I think this is part of his agenda, which probably emerges from engagement to some kind of a new approach to the global responsibilities. In fact, some of the analysts, they think that the basic motivation ideological is America First ideology. So perhaps that could be the one that they would like to take that money off their shoulders. I think USAID used to probably supervise assistance from the US in different forms to the tune of about over 43 billion or $44 billion. And it covered several sectors: health, education, demining, democracy, assistance to the fragile economies. So there's a variety of agenda that was under their belt. And also, unfortunately, USAID was also blamed by some quarters for being misused for several other aspects of the realpolitik in different parts of the world. So this decision, I think, in my view, has geopolitical, geoeconomic, and humanitarian aspects. So I'll take the humanitarian aspect first, this USAID used to be funding several initiatives in the especially the war-torn countries. And also, the most interesting is that I would like to underline that these were those countries which were actually victims of the wars waged by the US different administrations under one pretext or the other. I'm referring to Iraq, I'm referring to Afghanistan, I'm referring to Yemen, to Libya. Now, obviously, by one of the closest ally of the US, Israel, waged in Gaza and in Lebanon. And there are after effects of those wars. And there were several initiatives under USAID which are being implemented, especially being health, food security, water, sanitation, and most importantly, the gender, the women protection. So I think it will have an immediate impact on the crisis-ridden countries, which are, and in fact, which should be the moral responsibility of the US to assist now those people who are unfortunately the collateral damage, they call them, of those invasion or those attacks and bombings and missile attacks by the US itself. So in a way, on the moral grounds, on humanitarian grounds, I think is a decision which any person with some sense of history, with some sense of morality and a human conscience would not approve of it, but they have taken it. So it will have long-term effects, especially for these suffering people in different areas of the world. In addition, there are obviously geopolitical and geoeconomic implications of this decision by the US, which we'll discuss as you proceed in your discussions. Yes, Sana.
Right, absolutely. Faisal, your perspective, especially when we take a look at this from Pakistan's perspective, while of course there are many economies that are being affected, there is a lot of course, dependency that this creates in terms of the aid culture. And we've seen that come in our political rhetoric as well. But how much of that does directly impact the economic situation of the country and in the ways that our infrastructures are in place with, of course, institutions such as the USAID and of course aid flowing in from there, there is a lot of void or gap that it creates. So I want your take in terms of what you take in terms of these infrastructures and in the way that now that void is created, what Pakistan can do in this regard.
Yeah, obviously, Sana, when we talk about what USAID has been doing in Pakistan and in certain aspects, of course, when we talk about health sector, education sector and climate change sector, it has been a significant sort of improvement in terms of US aid has been putting in, and the every year millions of dollars they have been spent in Pakistan, and that's how it should be. Why I say this? Because to start with, why Pakistan required this US aid program? Reason being, Pakistan is one of the countries that has been a sort of facing collateral damage in terms of war which was going on for 20 years right next door to us, and the influx of the people we were getting from there, from Afghanistan in Pakistan, of course that was an extra burden on our own fragile economy. And why I say this fragile? Because when a country is actively fighting against the terrorism for more than 20 years, we have been fighting against war and terror. And of course, when we see that the Americans and the rest of the NATO countries, they go out of Afghanistan and suddenly, of course, they leave the mess once more with us. And that mess is still, of course, pouring in towards Pakistan in shape of course, the terrorist activities are still continuously taking place in Pakistan. When it comes to Pakistan fighting against it, of course, Pakistan is fighting against it. Pakistan is still fighting against the terrorism. In that context, so many people millions of people who actually came to Pakistan, that was a sort of collateral damage which Pakistan was facing in terms of that influx, and our economy was of course trying to cope with it. In these sort of situations, US aid and European Union aid, and of course Britain, it contributes a lot as well in Pakistan, knowing the facts on the grounds that Pakistan is doing so much for the of course countering this terrorism. In the whole scenario, of course, Pakistan was beneficiary, and rightly so, it should be. Reason being, this mess was created by the Western countries, and we were the ones who were actually coping with it, still are. And suddenly, when they go out, of course, it would create a havoc within Pakistan, the kind of support Pakistan was getting in terms of fixing its economy, and the sectors which were being neglected in terms of priorities. When your priority is to secure yourself, and when your priority is to, of course, the influx of the people that is pouring in Pakistan from the neighboring countries, of course, then you have to have extra support from the people who are the architects of this mess. So in this whole scenario, of course, US was playing pivotal role in terms of education sector, health sector, and then the environmental changes as well, which were taking place in Pakistan. So in this aspect, of course, if that is being shut down, then of course we have to look for the alternate. And if we are, as I am hearing, that the alternates would be provided if US aid is going to be shut down for now, then of course there will be other stakeholders like European Union. They have already playing a very positive role in Pakistan, and when it comes to UK's aid, Commonwealth aid, that has been of course reaching out to Pakistan in to replace the US aid. I am pretty much sure that there will be a mechanism that would increase the other stakeholders to, of course, put focus on the work which is being left over by US aid. And in the whole scenario,
what mechanism will that be?
Mechanism, of course, would be that the millions of dollars which were being brought in by US aid previously under their programs, if they want to discontinue in Pakistan, then them programs would be somehow taken up by the other stakeholders, because they know that Pakistan is still fighting this menace. Pakistan
You mean
is
external stakeholders?
External stakeholders, and
right.
yes, when it comes to US aid, of course, we know that Trump administration wants all of the underdeveloped countries to take their own burden on their own shoulders. But when it comes to a country like Pakistan that has been fighting against terrorism constantly, and at the same time trying to cope with the new menace of economic changes, and that too has nothing to do with Pakistan, that has everything to do with the war Pakistan is fighting, and at the same time the war which is going on in the other countries like in Middle East and like in Eastern Europe, that too has a huge impact on Pakistan in terms of Pakistan not relying on itself when it comes to the energy. And yes, of course, we have to import the energy, and our import bills are so havoc that it actually affects our economy itself. And in the whole scenario, of course, we do believe that the Western countries, they would be sane enough in terms of course, helping out Pakistan in terms of coping with this kind of situation, and knowing the facts about Pakistan, that Pakistan is still fighting a war that is inside Afghanistan, and that is not only a threat to Pakistan itself but to the Western world as well. So of course we expect that the Western world would be considerate enough in terms of, if somebody is getting out of here, then an alternate can be provided.
Right. And Farrukh, I want your take on this decision as well, and add to that whether or not we have actually prepared ourselves over the year for a scenario in which we are in a position like this, or in which there is aid that is being cut off to the country. Have we had that sort of political or economic culture or mindset or direction, at least to think in those terms, so that we have those avenues to then create our own systems?
Right. First of all, right off the bat, I just wanted to actually build some perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Just to understand the scale of this all regarding Pakistan, just understand, while it is aid and it was most welcome, and we should be grateful for this, it wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't, in the past we have heard that during Ayub Khan's time, USAID and many other organizations did, maybe not USAID, but various organizations actually put in a lot of effort and money in Pakistan. We kept on repeatedly hearing this afterwards, especially during the war on terror, but I haven't seen that kind of clear disclaimers anywhere, right? And we are going to talk about what kind of monies came, what happened to them, and whether there was transparency or not. But first of all, we have to appreciate the sociology of this America first ideology and why exactly is it happening that something as crucial or thought to be as crucial as USAID has been dismantled in such a fashion. Second World War ended. The West said that America is the leader of the free world, and it should actually build those countries that it essentially destroyed, Japan, Germany, after its own image. And we heard of Marshall Plan, whatnot. And after that, Bretton Woods system also came into existence. So there was this kind of creation that went on. Then after that, because at that time Cold War was very important. Cold War ended. At that time, Henry Kissinger, let me remind you of his quote, actually a reference because I don't exactly remember the words, that America has finally created an order out of which it cannot totally extricate itself, but it cannot dominate it either, right? So America created this kind of political order where it was being told that it is the leader. But two things happened after that. One, the tail started wagging the dog. All those so-called allies kept on saying, especially, I mean, bigger allies, that now we are at your mercy, so you have to actually help us out. And gradually, America's manufacturing went away in the name of globalization. And you kept on footing bill for all the military alliances. And on top of that, something else also happened. Two things actually. One, 2008 economic crash, and secondly, slightly before that, invasion of Iraq, where Americans thought that this, whatever mandate we are giving our government, our banks, they are not honest, right? So they thought that they need to actually ask others to take their own burden and then destroy this power to influence others so that economic suffering that Americans went through should not happen. Donald Trump came for the first time, he tried to do it, but at that time he did not have a team that was simpatico. This time he has come with exactly the like-minded team, and honestly, USAID's, I would call it own goal, because these people were repeatedly asked by Congress to actually provide audit and provide transparency, and they kept on saying that we don't answer to you, right? That is when Elon Musk went after this, and of course, then rest is history. Now, I want everybody to go and watch a podcast. It is available on YouTube by Joe Rogan, in which Mike Pence, a former State Department employee, is sitting and speaking. And he even mentions that there were aid in Pakistan's name, which was issued but went elsewhere for something else, right? So this is the whole thing. Eventually, when it comes to democracies function on the basis of popular vote, and we saw that this time American people clear-headedly chose their leader, and this is what they gave him permission for, exactly what is happening right now. Now about Pakistan, I have actually worked in the social sector also. Once I worked for an NGO that was adjacent to USAID, although I stayed there for 9-10 months and then got bored. I thought that it was paper pushing. It was called Internews. At Internews, I mean, USAID used to demand a lot of transparency from us. So much so that one time I remember we were traveling in interior Sindh, and one of our colleagues actually forgot a placard, right? A poster actually, banner, in his hotel room at Karachi. So she had to actually go back to collect that banner and come back, right? Otherwise USAID, because its name was not highlighted in the background, that would have not been actually financed. Regarding Kerry Lugar Burman package, and this is a concern regarding UN also, unfortunately, although UN does a great job, transparency has always been an issue. Pakistanis, all the Pakistan, we are told that you received so much aid. We don't have any method to know how much was released, what are the receivables, and what went where. Because of that, I think that all this exercise of aids in the end mean nothing to a common Pakistani, because in the end it doesn't transpire anywhere. The question is, if this well is drying up, although it has been reconfigured, now it reports to USAID team, actually reports to State Department, and it is still there, and aid can flow again anytime. But the fact is that any country the size of Pakistan, should it be depending on others? Is it not true that there are places in Pakistan which are not properly taxed? Is it not true that when it comes to bureaucracy, our bureaucracy has this capacity issue that money goes to waste as well at the grassroots level? And how much of money actually relapses every year, or then on the 11th hour it is just thrown away, so that capacity is not reduced or budget is not reduced. So we have to ask ourselves, regardless of what happens with the US, regardless of what happens with any other country that provides aid, and it is most welcome, thank you very much for doing that, how much of that goes to common man, and what capacities do we have, and do we have any elephants in the room, for example, for property sector, real estate sector, others, which are not properly being taxed, and that's why common man has to keep on adding more to the burden, his burden, and then we need to have this aid also. Otherwise, a lot of things, Sana. For example, plans, millions of dollars for plans. Why do you need plans for that much? Why can't you actually go to ChatGPT or any other Grok for that matter and ask, give me a good plan? Why do you have to throw away this kind of money just on paper? So this paper pushing and all this bureaucracy eventually had to change, and that is what is happening right now.
Sana, let me add something to what Farrukh has highlighted, and I think it's a brilliant point. What happens is, normally, all of these plans and what kind of projects they want to do, they hire somebody from, Wall Street, they hire somebody from New York, and companies from there, they are the ones who are actually doing the surveys, making the plans, and then charging hefty amounts, like in millions of dollars. So the dollars which are supposed to be, spent in Pakistan, they, technically speaking, they stay in US in terms of, all of these planners and all of these people who make the, these kind of surveys, and them all companies, they happen to be, being in New York, being in Wall Street, and that's how it is. So eventually, I think, why can't they do justice with Pakistan in the terms that there are many universities, there are many people who are able enough to make these plans, able enough to make these projects and do the surveys as well. Why can't they spend that money there rather than giving it out to somebody already in New York? In that way, I think the actual money that belongs to Pakistan will actually come to Pakistan.
By the way, just very quickly, I know that you are going to go to Ambassador Saab, and I would love to hear what he has to say. If you want to know about waste, just read cigar reports regarding Afghanistan before the US withdrawal. The hotel that was built adjacent to the embassy, how big a risk it was, because it was never properly built and money walked away.
Right. Absolutely. Ambassador Saab, I want your take on this discussion as well. And add to that, when we talk about the USAID, of course, that's a more direct impact that we're looking at. But in terms of the Trump administration and the kind of stance that we have seen it take, and of course, the ways in which the US is so closely linked to institutions such as the World Bank or the IMF, a lot of that, of course, also points towards the potential existence of any change of stance in the coming years or so with regards to these institutions and, of course, our associations or dependencies on them as well. So I want your take in terms of how then will we be also politically aligning in terms of any possible change of stance in that scenario?
Say, realignment of our foreign policy really is difficult to predict at this point of time. I think exercise is going on, like different scenarios are being.
But Ambassador Sab, I don't just mean in terms of foreign policy. I mean particularly in terms of institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, because when we talk about aid and its direct impact, of course, these institutions also have a very direct impact, and they, of course, then are closely aligned with the US administration.
Yeah, Sana, these institutions in the name are all economic and financial institutions. So is the USAID, but essentially they are the tools of the geostrategic and geoeconomic interest of the major stakeholder, that is the US. So I think in the coming years, in fact, I was reading a report that perhaps even the Trump administration is thinking of abdicating its role from the IMF and the World Bank. If that be the case, what will happen? So I think we have to keep in mind that this administration has a different worldview about themselves and about the world. What now they see is a sort of say goodbye to multilateralism. It will be unilateralism, one, that they probably don't want to take the burden of the world, or they will pick and choose. So what I see is that these institutions will remain under the influence of the US, whether Pakistan is aligned or otherwise, but they will disperse the amounts as per the overall policy priorities, geostrategic policy priorities of these countries. As we know that recently the World Bank and Pakistan signed an MOU for $40 billion in the next 10 years. So there is this independence of action by the World Bank. In fact, these institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, have acquired life of their own. It will be difficult for the US or any other stakeholder to just say goodbye and then wish them a demise. No, that will be difficult. USAID is different. Yes, it's purely a US kind of institution and is totally dependent on the US. But World Bank, its configuration, its board, its membership is a global phenomenon. So I think immediately I do not see any demise of the World Bank and IMF. So just to give a brief answer to your question, that in the coming years, I think Pakistan's relationship with these Bretton Woods institutions would continue because they have a stake. So they won't like, and they have investments. So I think they would like to do it. But what happens that whether a day comes in the coming year or 2 years, whatever we read in the paper is really implemented by the Trump administration, that they say henceforth we withdraw as the major stakeholder, we'll just be a nominal member and let other people chip in and then see how IMF World Bank realigns itself. But I think at this point of time it will be difficult, although I'm not an economist, but I think it is to do with the global system based on the dollars, and of course World Bank and IMF are tools of that big design. But I'd like to just say a few words on USAID and its impact on Pakistan and other countries. See, USAID had two phases. One was the humanitarian and other was the policy tool. It was a policy tool to influence those societies, to play that game of hearts and minds. Because it came into being in the height of the Cold War, and it continued. It kept changing its forms and its operational SOPs. As we see that in the Afghan war, we saw that USAID was active in even mobilizing Mujahideen. So they were, in a way, were part of an insurgency. Then we see that they might be used for empowerment of a certain segment of society. Now we see under the Biden, USAID was more focused on climate change and LGBT rights and so on and so forth. So I think USAID essentially has been the tool of policy of the US administration, whichever is in power. So now, since it has withdrawn, maybe something good will come out, and that is what our friends were referring to, that dependency syndrome that comes with any assistance, foreign assistance, this might be an opportunity for countries like Pakistan to be self-sustaining in these vital sectors, that is health, education, empowerment of the women, child labor, and so on and so forth. So I think we should see this decision not in absolute terms, but in relative terms, that it has drawbacks, but it could even be a good opportunity for countries to self-sustain. But there are certain critical countries that I earlier referred to, which are in crisis, which are the result of the interventionist policies followed by the different US administrations. They have to bear the responsibility for those people. The people in Gaza, the people in Lebanon, the people in Yemen, the people in Africa especially, Sudan, Somalia, they are suffering HIV. What will they do? The mortality. So I think there is a need for maybe new actors to come in. China could be one, European Union could fill in that gap. And if they fill in that gap, obviously it will be a strategic and political gain for them and loss for the US. Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Farrukh, you wanted to add something on the IMF?
Yeah, I just wanted to very quickly further what Ambassador Saab was saying when it comes to economy. I believe that throughout my life, and now I have grey hair, I've seen that we have always lived in this state of affairs where continuously we would be actually speculating whether we are going to get more tranches or not. So we have to one day realize that this is not how you spend your life, right? But regarding IMF and World Bank and Bretton Woods systems, it is correct that in Project 2025, it is mentioned that America withdraws from it, and even Doge's foundational documents. But what I've heard, they are not currently thinking of withdrawing from these two bodies.
We're now going to move on to our next segment that also takes a look at the economy, but of course in terms of Pakistan's perspective with a historic decline that we've seen in the CPI inflation. And this is of course important, particularly in terms of the ways in which the institutions have tried to move forward in a positive direction. And we've seen this after 9 years happening, that we have this index at 1.51%. And Faisal, I'll take your input first in terms of course, how we've been talking about economy, and we've seen this trend of the CPI index going down, and now it's a number that we can speak about in a way that of course is impacting the economy. But I want your take in terms of what you think that means in the longer run, and whether or not we're going to see this trend actually continue and impact the economy in a positive way, so we can actually reduce inflation.
Yes, so now obviously when we talk about the kind of inflation rate, I mean, in 10 years, last 10 years, this is, a decline in terms that, of course, when we, I mean, I was expecting last month, every year when there is Ramadan, as soon as Ramadan approaches, the inflation, it gets skyrocketing, But this time around, it was so controlled, and the kind of figures that are coming, they're suggesting two things. Number one, of course, there is a control by the government, and the administrative control is there, and it is being seen overall. And secondly, the growth has increased, and I think the growth increasing, and then the product being available in the markets easily, that has actually shrunk the inflations. And I think if further growth will be increasing in the coming months and years, then that's how we can, of course, keep a tight cap on it, and the inflation would be not becoming a beast for us like it does, always in past it has been doing, but now it is fully controlled, and the kind of figures which are coming.
Is it fully controlled though?
Yeah, it is on the ground. If we go to markets and everywhere, the kind of expectations, I mean, wrong expectations I had last month, that before the Ramadan there will be a hike in the prices. The inflation would be, of course, breaking the roofs, and it would be showing itself. But this time around, this is not the case. I mean, in the markets, the prices, they are so controlled. Even there are certain markets in which you can get the items on a very cheaper rate, and that is, of course, that shows that the administrative control is there. And secondly, the growth is so enormous and it is increasing day by day that it has its own impact on the markets as well. So it is, of course, a very positive trend, and this trend, as long as it carries itself on, then of course the inflation would be controlled in coming months and years. And I think the growth indicators, they would be showing the positive tendency as well.
Right, and Farrukh, I want your perspective on this as well. Even, of course, the number of years that we have seen this downward trend, there's still a long way to go when we talk about inflation. But I want your perspective in terms of whether you think this will actually continue and what needs to be done to sustain it and to move it in that direction where we can actually see inflation coming down.
Right, Sana, thank you very much. One thing that everybody who is watching this needs to comprehend is that there is a difference between inflation and prices.
Yeah.
Right? Cost of certain things can be high, but even then a CPI rate can actually be going down.
Yeah.
And why would that happen? Because the month on month, year on year increase in the prices, the speed with which it was increasing is going down. And we have seen, Faisal is right, we have seen horrible rate of inflation. Why does inflation actually happen? There are basically three things that can happen. First and second are connected though. The first one is, of course, supply and demand issue, right? If you have more demand and less supply, inflation goes up. Similarly, the second one, of course, it is supply and demand, but it is not within your control because it is external shocks. For example, what happened with Russia and Ukraine. Similarly, even the Arab world was also worried about what was happening in Gaza. Because of that also things actually become complicated, and then on top of that the US bailout packages that were offered. Larry Summers and other people actually think that might have caused inflation as well. Once again, more money, less things, then things actually, and of course COVID in the middle also came, and that also broke the global value chains. So there were external shocks, in huge ones, right? And the third one is bad governance. When jobbers and black marketeers actually hoard and they actually keep on playing with cost whatever way they like because of the absence of governance, that also happens. So Pakistan in the past 10 years has suffered through all three things. We had historical floods, I mentioned external issues also, and finally then because there was ever changing government, we kept on changing finance ministers, there was no policy stability, and then price control mechanism was also hardly there. And now, although I would have loved to see a local government actually taking this action because it is essentially its remit, but at least provincial governments are cracking down on those things as well. So with that kind of situation, I think we are in better space now, and it is going to improve. Although I hope that Ukraine matter also settles so that that external shock also goes away. But internally, that binary we had, where because cost was very high, inflation was very high, because of that you had to keep interest rate very high.
Yeah.
That is relieving. I want to see more relaxation in interest rates.
Yeah.
And after policy rate cut, then I want to see economic growth which is sustainable, because we have another problem also. Once your growth actually starts, immediately what happens, your imports actually increase substantially, and what happens, dollar leaves the country, and you end up with the current account deficit. So that is something that we have to keep a lookout for. And IMF has been very clear on this matter that Pakistan should be conservatively optimistic, right?
Right.
Watchful when it is opening up the economy. But I hope that we are moving in that direction now.
Absolutely, that is the hope. Thank you very much, Farrukh and Faisal, for joining us as always. And of course, we'll be here to talk more about it. But so far, the numbers are encouraging, and we hope that continues. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.